3, 2, 1, let's go.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Aleph Podcast. Today I have with me JAMAL RAHMAN, formerly of Brew Records and now a filmmaker.
That's right. Thank you for having me, Mayor.
You're welcome. So how's it going? How's filmmaking life treating you?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a hard reset because not only did I switch careers 10, 11 years in, but I also switched cities.
Yeah.
So kind of having to start over in a sense, despite having all this experience, is definitely an interesting, circumstance to be in. And I would recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like quite a fresh kind of space to be in.
Yeah, and towards the end of True Brew, I was kind of feeling a little creatively stagnant and just not moving forward, kind of regressing even. And I needed a bit of a jolt, so to speak. वो jolt थोड़ा सा मैंने extra कर दिया कि I've also moved cities.
Yeah.
But I do feel that sort of surge that I initially felt, and for most of True Brew I felt, has kind of come back because now my perspective on what it means to create something is completely changed and expanded, I would say. It's more sort of encompassing. Not to say that music is limiting, but video inherently or film inherently has audio and music in it. So the way that I see film is really it's the apex of all of the arts. You have interior and architecture, you have art or art design, or you have any kind of visual medium that you may be working in. You have audio in there, you have storytelling. It kind of is the culmination of all of the arts, at least for me. So in that, I find that my palette has vastly increased. And that's very liberating.
Yeah. And what do you think from your True Brew experience, what are the elements that are most kind of useful to you now, having been through all that as a filmmaker?
Well, the biggest thing is, I think, that sense of community that I was able to develop around True Brew, and how that sort of support and conversation leads to new ideas and new things happening. And just being able to pull all of these projects together in a way that's efficient but also creatively rewarding. And then also having kind of been around, worked in the market, worked in the commercial side, the independent side, I have a sort of more holistic picture of what it takes to be a creative in Pakistan. And that definitely helps. So I have, systems in place, if you will, already. So it's not like I'm 100% starting new, but I'm having to sort of reapply those with a new perspective and out of a new lens.
Yeah, I mean, you just said what it takes to be a creative in Pakistan. What does it take? According to the JAMAL RAHMAN playbook.
I think you need to be obsessive. I think you really need to be obsessive, and you need to be completely undaunted by any kind of failure or rejection. And really, I think the biggest thing you need to have is a sense of validation within yourself as opposed to needing external validation. Especially if you're working in something that's kind of out of the box or creative, immediately there is going to be resistance to those ideas in terms of them being unfamiliar. And over the course of time, as you continue doing them, people may start to recognize, or may even not. I don't know. That depends on each person's subjective journey. But I think you really need a sort of iron will and a dogged sort of obsession with your work. And I think the one missing ingredient I won't say one missing ingredient, but I say the one vital ingredient is discipline. I think that is crucial because essentially you're working for yourself. And you set your own deadlines, you set your own goals, you set your own milestones, and therefore knowing exactly how to get there, or at least having some kind of a decided path. Okay, I want to get to XYZ place, utilizing this method and this method over this amount of time, is something that keeps you on track.
Yeah.
And you need a lot of discipline to stay with that.
Yeah, you do. But, often though, like, even best laid plans, you don't end up where you wanted to be in a certain time frame.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that? Not necessarily failure, but those like bumps in the road, because as you said, it's like a very self-driven thing. Plus, if you are the primary person that's convincing yourself that this is the correct path, I need to stick on it no matter what it takes, but it's not quite working out. I mean, at what point do you think one needs to reevaluate? I mean, I'm assuming something like that must have happened in the first place to
100%.
make you a filmmaker from an audio guy.
So there is that element of conviction, which of course you need to have by the truckload.
Yeah.
Over and above that, I would say that it's something quite interesting that I was doing sort of naturally, but didn't really approach it from a more academic perspective until I went to film school. And I realized one of the first things they tell you is that nothing will ever go according to plan, and you just have to roll with the punches, because just the nature of production itself means that the infinite amount of variables on your plate will throw spanners in different kinds of works, and that means you really need to know how to think on your feet. And I've always been someone who enjoys that conversation with their work. Yeah. So if I put something down, even if it's an audio track, or if it's a music piece, or if it's a score or whatever, or if it's a piece of writing, or if it's a music video, it is going to speak to you. You throw something at it, it takes form, you look at it, then you kind of reevaluate and you move forward. So that conversation with your work is something that I actually learned in art school, funny enough, but never sort of formalized until it was said in those words that you really need to be able to think on your feet. Yeah. And everything that I've done with True Brew, it was to a sort of to fulfill a larger vision. But plans kept changing in the middle. Yeah. New things came to light, new information, new people, how to incorporate that, how to be open to those ideas, and then also know which ones are workable and which ones are not. Yeah. That is essentially a muscle you have to develop over time. Yeah. And only by exercising it can you really get that.
I mean, let's take a step back. And when you went to, so your background before True Brew is you went to art school.
I went to art school, yeah.
And so where did you have a vision of something along the lines of True Brew before going to art school, or did that develop as
it developed at art school, actually? I'd always one of those cliched stories, mujhe music bachpan se pasand hai. But that is true for me as well. A lot of music in my family. My parents used to have regular sort of concerts in their drawing room, very informal. Ustad Sain Zahoor, Ustad Bathane Khan were some of the favorites, used to come very often and perform there. And just, 20 odd of their friends. And that's how they used to entertain. And we had recordings of those concerts on very basic tapes, very basic recording. Yeah. Desi style, ek wo cassette deck laga hua hai, 2 tapes lagi हुई है और वो mixer के through जा रहा है.
So we were talking about your background and your family situation of recordings in your home and coming from that. So art school was a natural choice at that point.
I mean, if I think back, I was always interested. I was still playing music at the time. I was also very interested in film, but it just didn't seem like those were things that I should go to school for some reason. Maybe I didn't have the confidence at that time, and I felt art was really my calling. But what art school did teach me mostly is because I went to a place called Chelsea College of Art, and there is really no structure to the course except for like given 2-3 classes of lectures in a week. Everything else is studio practice. Excuse me. So studio practice means that you spend whatever amount of time you want sitting in your allotted space, and you come up with projects on your own and in conversation with your tutors. Okay. So it's really kind of up to you what direction you want to go. It's very open-ended, and they guide you according to what ideas you may have. And so that kind of instilled in me the idea that everything must generate from within one person, and not sort of dictated by briefs or so on. Not that briefs are bad. I mean, I quite enjoy them, but that sort of practice of being able to come up with ideas from research, from things that you're thinking, your experiences, things that influence you, and places you want to be and things you want to do and so on. There's a myriad number of influences in that. So that kind of taught me how to generate projects in a sense. But by the time I left art school, I was already kind of envisioning this idea for a music studio that was a sort of alternative to the very sort of prevalent rock sound in Pakistan in the 2000s. I set it up around late 2009. So it was a tail end of a sort of almost a decade of live music and concerts and stuff. Coke Studio had just come out, maybe a second year in, and it was kind of doing something different. It wasn't that typical rock stuff anymore, but I really felt that there's more room for other genres to exist in Pakistan. And so that kind of vision led to me setting up True Brew. And its main purpose was to promote independent music in whatever genre that may be. And just try and kind of have a sort of conversation point that was contrary to what was happening in the mainstream. And over the 11, almost 12 years actually, it kind of evolved into newer and newer things. As new technologies came in, the internet really took over, digital really became a thing, it became a bigger medium than when I started out. पहले सिर्फ SoundCloud था, then YouTube came, and YouTube ban भी हो गया, वापस भी आ गया, Spotify अब आया, so different things that come in, and obviously also the cost of technology went down, cameras became more available, DSLRs came into the market, so a lot of things were changing very quickly in this last decade, and again, you really have to constantly be in tune with your surroundings, your environment, and technology especially, because that really is sort of your medium in that sense. So it just kind of naturally seemed to evolve. When I initially set it up, it was supposed to be a record label. And I quickly realized that the income streams in Pakistan for musicians are very limited. So a record label without some kind of external funding wouldn't really fly. And some new kind of monetary model was required. Which I never cracked, by the way. I don't think anyone has. I don't think anyone has, except for sort of the corporate really side of
corporate independent music stream.
Corporates essentially do work as a sort of record label system in bits and bobs rather than the whole thing. But anyway, so True Brew kind of generated from an initial idea of a record label into a gig space, into a production house for music, where I was also able to build this community of young musicians, new musicians, and even old musicians. And really kind of be that sort of go-to place for a alternative sound, whatever that may be. And we weren't ever limited to genre in that sense. Even if we did rock music, we always try to do it differently. Somehow, every project, my sort of mantra was that you must bring something new every time. And by challenging yourself, not only are you growing, you're helping the larger landscape grow as well. Because you need to kind of lead with things that you feel are possible. And as they also say in film school, again formalized there, write the film you want to see. So you release the music, when you produce the music you want to hear out there, right? And that immediately makes for a much wider palette of conversation instead of just one genre and done in one style because it's trendy or whatever. I think it's very important to kind of keep pushing those envelopes and trying new things. So that's kind of to bring it back to your question, I think it's super, super important to be always engaged with the work in a way that it tells you things while you tell it things, and that conversation and feedback is very important because it helps you grow as an artist, as a creative, and through that you're more relevant, you're more contemporary, and if you're really kind of on the ball, you can actually be ahead of the curve as well.
Yes. I mean, so as True Brew progressed and as the vision kind of evolved, at what point did you feel that, in order to fulfill your vision, you need to go beyond music?
So in about 2017, mid 2017, I set up True Brew TV, which was meant because I was already doing gigs for the last 5-6 years.
Yeah.
And I wanted to take those gigs and archive them.
Yeah.
So I started hiring a video team and recording all of it, not quite knowing what to do. And I started this back in 2012. But right then, the YouTube ban kicked in.
Yeah.
So that plan kind of got kind of put in the back burner.
Yeah.
When YouTube was reopened, that's when about a year or so, I think 2016 mein khula tha na? So about 2017 mid, I decided to kind of venture forth into that territory and start recording. I was already doing all the audio recordings of those shows, but I started recording video as well.
Yeah.
And then I thought I should set up again, like just get back to my old plan, set up a YouTube channel, start putting those things out there again. And so I got Zain Pirzada in and Umar Lahuti, and the three of us burnt the midnight oil and started kind of this YouTube channel called True Brew TV.
Yeah.
Which also got me thinking there's a lot of room here in video making, and I was always interested in it. But it kind of came to this point where I was like, A, burnt out from like almost a decade into music.
Yeah.
B, feeling like I needed a new injection of something, anything. And I decided to do a film course, thinking that I would come back and do music videos only.
Right.
When I got to film school, I realized, wait a minute, there's a whole world out here.
Could be a filmmaker.
To be a filmmaker, right? And to work in narrative specifically.
Yeah.
So that kind of opened me up to a whole new sort of path of learning. Since film school, I've been studying and working on screenwriting and helping and working on improving my craft. I'm generally the sort of person that loves to learn. I don't study, I learn. There is a difference, right?
Yeah.
Learning is very sort of practical in that sense. Not that studying isn't, but for me, learning is definitely something that I really enjoy.
While doing actual projects.
Yeah. And I think it's a really important thing for an artist to constantly learn, not only how to engage with their work and with new ideas, but also to have new skill sets as you do. So since 2019, when I did my film course, I started doing a couple of music videos, which became a transition point, having sort of a breadth of knowledge of how music works and how audio works, bringing that into a visual domain, and this kind of also kind of harks back to my in my teens I did a lot of theater.
Right.
So a lot of sort of what storytelling is in a visual medium, in a performance medium, what it means thematically about what you're saying, what the subtext is, things like that kind of apply into any visual medium as well when you're talking about music videos and storytelling in general. And so since then I've basically been engaging with that practice in a different way, in that telling stories via the image. At some level I believe that I was telling stories through my music.
Yeah.
And now that it's more formalized, more academic, and I have a better understanding of it, it's taken this shape. Yeah.
I mean, so you have now also, as you said, moved to Karachi in the process.
Yeah.
In my experience, there's, growing up in Pakistan or trying to be a creative and trying to fulfill a vision, a big part of what helps that happen or what holds that back is the community around you, right? So what would you say is been, what would you say is different between Lahore and Karachi in that respect? Because the communities are there in both spaces.
Yeah.
But I have my personal feelings about it, but I want to know what you feel, because I feel somehow Karachi has a little bit more openness to new things. But I might be wrong about that because I haven't lived in Lahore in that space.
Honestly, I'm too new in Karachi to really have a accurate assessment on that. But I can tell you about Lahore, which is that I think there was a sort of void where the sort of music community was that the community needed to exist.
Yeah.
And I was never sure what that community would look like, because it's an organic mass. It's not an inanimate object, right? It works very dynamically depending on who you are as the person in the center and what you stand for and what your vision is, and what you promote and what you encourage.
Yeah.
So it really kind of stems from that point. So for music, I really felt I felt a lot of support. I felt a lot of sort of love around the things that I was doing. There was sometimes some unfair expectations as well, because sometimes people feel a little entitled.
Sure.
But that's fine.
Yeah.
On the whole, I would say that many good things came out of developing that community and running it for a while. And without blowing my own horn, I would like to take some credit for where music is now in terms of how I think a lot of people find themselves parts of crews that have been through True Brew in some way or form. So I'd like to think that influence was a positive one on them.
Definitely.
And in general, I would say that the newer sort of generation of musicians has a fascinating approach, which is to produce more music, just kind of keep throwing music out there.
Yeah.
And I think that the sort of music community in Lahore is more sort of together. I don't really know about Karachi, and the film community as such, I'm still getting to know people, so I couldn't really speak for that. But there's definitely a togetherness, a closeness, a sort of a mutual respect and support in the Lahore community, and that led to some really good years through this last decade. And I think this new decade, young people like Manu, Abdullah Siddiqui, Rosio, Towers, all of these boys, Natasha Noorani, Natasha Jazz, even like people like Hania Aslam, you know, these are people that have a lot of great ideas that they are now, you know, feeling that they need to put more out of.
They're more empowered as well.
They're more empowered, and you know, the younger ones have grown up on the internet, so for them, ulte haath ka khel hai. It's just like, you know, they don't need to think twice about it. For someone who was much older when I was engaging with new media on the internet, it takes me a lot longer to you know, to refine something and make it ready for release. But it's inspiring to me to see how quickly they will get from point A to point Z and then just put it out there. And I think that inertia has really helped the community to awaken a new love for music in the audience. And it's also a new audience, no doubt. But I think that sort of there was a sort of gap between where the artist was and where the audience was, and that gap was filled by releases, but the releases were so far and few that the conversation didn't catch steam. Now, because there are so many releases, always things happening, they're always in the limelight, and that always keeps the audience engaged. So I think that's quite brilliant.
It's good observation. Although on the flip side, you know, I feel and this is why one of the reasons I miss True Brew, and I guess it's been a part of the inspiration for doing Aleph here and building this community, because what I found every time I went there for a gig, and I visited Lahore often.
Yes.
And oftentimes, visiting Lahore was driven by, these gigs are happening at True Brew, and this month I want to go and check them out, and plus I'll get to meet friends or whatever.
Yeah.
But it had this effect of introducing me as a musician and producer to other people who were like-minded or who I could work with, and B, bridging the gap between Karachi and Lahore in the scene.
Yeah.
Because bands from Karachi, my own band included, DA Method and others performed there, and that audience got to see, like, Towers was a Karachi project,
and
absolutely. Ended up being more popular in
Lahore,
Punjab. But it's cool how that happened, and I feel like, unfortunately, with True Brew not being there and no one else like taking up the mantle, so to speak, in Lahore, it's kind of got missing. And there was also that excitement, like, I went there the first time and I sat with you and we listened to some Red Blood Cat material.
Yeah.
And then I was like, holy shit, when is this going to come out?
Yeah.
Like, there was this excitement and that thing of people working on stuff, tinkering with it to the point of perfection, to the point where things just fall apart even.
There were some people like that.
Yeah, and there's a different excitement and inspiration that gives you versus things, you just think of an idea, you go get on Ableton, and the next day it's ready, and you just get on to making a video.
I think they're two different approaches. I don't think neither is better or worse.
Absolutely.
I think it's very subjective for the artist and how they want to engage with their work. You also have to give credit to how technology has changed. Like when I started True Brew, we were recording everything live, and my process was to get a band in, rehearse the song for a day, maybe two, get a structure down, get the parts down, really kind of break it down into its sort of structural elements, its emotional elements, and its arrangements in general. And then everybody, since, they'd worked it out, they'd rehearsed it, would know exactly what to play, go in, track it. And that was a 5-day period.
Yeah.
Maybe 4 days, 5 days.
It's pretty much how we do things here.
Yeah, right? So that's generally how it would work.
Yeah.
Then another, I would say maybe a week mixing it, taking a break for a few days, letting your ears rest, coming back to the project, mixing it, doing a couple of passes, sending it for mastering, boom. So that's like in 2 weeks, that's how we used to put things out, right? Now, because technology has shifted so much and the economy of music making has shifted so much, think about historically things came from consoles and tape machines to the laptop, right? Yeah. And now so that the instruments have also kind of gone into the laptop in that sense, and technology is kind of, I wouldn't say replaced, but given a more feasible substitute for younger musicians to engage with music. It does defy everything that I grew up with, which was instrumental music in terms of masters at their craft, and being able to having developed those skills over a lifetime to get to that point. And now really it's all in a box and a few keys, you can have that same quality. You can't deny how accessible it has made music for people, and I think that's a beautiful thing in that respect, in terms of I'm not saying that I was actually having a conversation with someone who's a DJ, and his entire family is like virtuosos. He personally didn't pursue music in that sense, but when he was a kid, he used to play piano. He engages with it in a very sort of visceral, very organic way. So you can't necessarily articulate this, but it's inherently in him. And the way that he engages with it is how he curates his sets, his DJ sets, and then also what he does with the tracks and so on. And I think there really shouldn't be one way to engage with any kind of art, right? So for these people to be able to do it on their own terms and utilize technology and empower themselves, I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's great. But I mean, on the flip side, I feel so, there's one thing that if you spend 10 years on a craft, and in the old school way you had to, before you got to the point where you could professionally play something that is worthy of paying recording studio time to go and record,
Yeah.
right? Then I think part of that whole growth that happens, you develop interesting and maybe worthwhile or relevant things, observations to say in the content of your lyrics. You know, there's a journey you go through. Like, you know, you can't play the blues unless you have the blues kind of concept, right? You know, you need to go through life. And I feel nowadays, because of how quick everything is, and a lot of these young guys, and with no meaning, no disrespect to any of them, but they haven't lived through certain phases of life yet to have any kind of relevant thing to say about it. So as a result, a lot of the lyrics are kind of throwaway, and the conversations are kind of just topical and not really long-term relevant. For example, you know, because there's something coming out every month, so there's not, you know, the audience doesn't have to dwell on anything that has been said or absorb it for a longer period of time. So what I'm trying to say is there's a role of the artist in progressing thought on a social level, which is kind of came part and parcel with the, you know, ustad system of having a proper teacher or having going through a proper process,
upholding tradition
of achieving mastery in something, right? And then you get to say something which is something that can progress thought, or it can evolve thought, or it can challenge certain kind of thinking. What happened with us, I think, ironically, is the whole ustad system made certain people feel like they own certain knowledge, and you know that certain people don't deserve to have that knowledge, and so they kept it to themselves rather than bring it to the masses.
Right.
And because of that kind of, you know, thing festering in one corner, the young guys kind of thought, okay, we don't need these guys, we don't need their approval or their help or their you know, ustadgiri or whatever. Let's just do our own thing. So now we've kind of got a dichotomy of, on the one hand, you have really skilled maestros which no one listens to, and on the other hand, you've got computer wizards and production wizards and just cool kids that are really fun to watch and to hear and whatever. But you could argue maybe in 10 years no one would remember them because they never said anything that had a long-term impact. So there's still I feel there's a gap that's widening actually at this point in time.
I want to address that in two ways. Firstly, I think in the world there is room to engage with all kinds of art, and I do firmly believe that there is an audience for everything. There is definitely an audience for the virtuoso. There is an audience for the laptop rapper. What's more trendy, what's less trendy, I can't really comment on that. That's a sign of the times, and frankly, not in any one person's or any one community's control. No one's control. So I think, firstly, there has been a sort of slightly myopic sort of, I would say conversationally, I found people to be this or that, where I think there's room for both things to exist. And I think to cultivate both in a way, one will always be better than the other, or the third will be better, or the fourth, or whatever, who's to say. But if you engage with your art in that way, then continue doing so. There is no reason for you to put aside all of the things that you've worked hard on and thought of and suddenly be like, okay, that's trendy, gonna jump on that bandwagon. That comes across as inauthentic. And frankly, inauthenticity leads to failure in the sense that if you're not doing it from the heart, especially where art is concerned,
you're not going to feel fulfilled.
You're not going to feel fulfilled, and the work won't be that good. Secondly, I do think that when you talk about saying something meaningful, there are artists who start with something meaningful. There are artists that build towards something meaningful. And again, it's that same concept of engaging with your work and engaging with life and constantly moving forward. I will disagree with you in that if you are young and you don't have anything to say that you ought not to create, I would disagree with you there. In fact, I think it's
I
very
don't necessarily
important.
mean to say that you
Let
are
me give you an
not
example.
to.
Let me give you an
Yeah.
example. Abdullah Siddiqui started at age 11, 12 on an iPad. And whatever you may think of his music in terms of your subjective opinion, if you actually look at the craft that he's gotten to in terms of
It's
the way
brilliant.
that he puts his music together, it is phenomenal, right? So he engages with it and technology in a very different way. But he spent a good decade now doing that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in that sense, a guitar player who spent a decade doing that, and he might be on the same level, but they're engaging in a different way, right, with their work. So both are important.
Right.
Both are equally important. One
Right,
is...
but for
Yeah.
there's the one Abdullah Siddiqui, but without naming anyone, there's several people that would just go on SoundCloud or whatever, buy a pre-made
Yeah,
beat
sure.
and just pen some interesting hooks on it,
Yeah.
and that's a song. And that's the approach that many people are
And,
now taking, and
some of
successfully.
Some of
as
those
well.
people write really good songs.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, if I'm listening to music as a layperson,
Yeah.
I do want to listen to a good song,
Yeah.
right? And if the song is good, there's something there. I mean, I like to look at the positives of whatever work is out there, and if it's really trash, then it's trash. Then don't engage with it.
Yeah.
But I do think some of those people write some really cool pop hooks.
Right, but don't you think that a lot of trash also does get popular by appealing
There
to
is
the
no
lowest
account-
common denominator?
There is no accounting for
Like,
taste in that sense, yeah.
we can go into the filmmaking example
Yeah.
of what's a Michael Bay movie versus a Christopher Nolan movie, right? So
Both have audiences, though.
both definitely have audiences.
Yeah.
Both make lots of money.
Yeah.
But I think you can subjectively say that some have, this camp has things that you will dwell on for longer periods of time and maybe bring things to your own life that you might learn from watching that film multiple times, versus something that's just entertainment, right?
And I don't think that just entertainment should be discounted in what it does for the soul.
Fair.
I think that the world is a harsh place.
Yeah.
It's brutal. There's bad things happening everywhere. It's not easy to be on this earth. It's beautiful in every which way, but it's also tough. And because it's tough, it's also beautiful. And if someone can provide
The
a
escapism.
moment's respite for a person who's going through a tough time, music does that, art does that, poetry does that, film does that. That's a beautiful contribution to someone. So I think everything has its purpose in that.
Yeah.
And when I was younger and getting into music, I used to think entertainment is a bad word. Music is not entertainment. I want to say something with my music. And that's perfectly fine. You can have both. You can have artists who are entertaining, make entertaining work, and also have something that you engage
Have
with on a deeper
artistically
philosophical
something to say,
level, right? And you can have music that's like throwaway, good time, party music.
Yeah.
And I love dancing to that.
Yeah.
So it brings me some joy.
Yeah.
And I think it brings joy to other people. So as long as you're... I think, another thing that I learned in art school I would like to say is the only failure for a piece of work is if people don't engage with it. Whether that's a negative or a positive. If someone's reaction to a piece of work is indifference... that is much worse than a positive and negative reaction. At least in a positive and negative reaction, the person felt something.
Yeah.
And art needs to make people feel.
It needs to be engaged with.
It needs to be engaged with. So in that sense, they're successful because if you subjectively feel X person's music is trash, it's making you feel something negative about it.
Yeah,
in essence, it's working.
Fair.
It's doing its job.
Yeah.
Right?
It's making my vision clearer for what I want to do.
Yeah, and it's just as important to know what you like and what you don't like.
That's fair. So coming back to, we were talking about the topic of different kinds of filmmakers going for different approaches, whether it's purely trying to entertain or trying to do a combination of, making people think or taking collective thought forward in some way. So what kind of filmmaker do you aspire to be?
I think the best films do both, really, for me personally. I want to come away with something from the film, from the story. But I also want to be enraptured by what's happening. It has to be a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
And some very light films manage to say some very deep and
things,
heavy things.
Yeah.
But I realized early on, I've always had a penchant for comedy. But I realized that in my adulthood, especially the last decade or so, I don't watch any comedies.
Yeah.
And so when I got out of film school, I thought I would make something really funny. And I started looking to my sort of library of films that, that I love. And I was like, wait a second. Everything here is drama, and really intense drama, like Breaking Bad, and, sort of character-driven stories that tackle you and their subject matter in a very mature way.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, hang on a second, why am I doing comedy?
Yeah.
If the things that I want to talk about and the things that I want to say are sort of more deep, right? So how do you kind of find that balance?
Well, I mean, I was having this conversation with Hamza Jaffrey, right, on because what pulled me in to Kovan was Ready to Die and the video that came with it. And there's something very funny about it. There's this
something
really
wickedly
dark
funny,
comedy about it. Right? So, and similarly, Breaking Bad has some really deep and dark humor
absolutely.
to it as well.
Absolutely.
The whole Jesse Pinkman and Walt relationship. So I think, possibly one of the hardest genres to pull off is that very serious tone, but at the same time inherently very funny.
Not ha-ha funny, but
but like if you think about it, it'll make you like, not necessarily laugh out loud, but you see the humor in it.
Right.
And it's part of the human condition. Like there's so much irony in life and the stories that we face and the situations that we come across.
I think for me personally, when I started studying story and storytelling and screenwriting, I understood that even the lightest film isn't made without a theme. There is always something thematic at the very core of it, whether that's love or war or justice or morality or whatever, all these kind of more philosophical concepts. There's always something underneath all of those stories. And that's, when they say it's funny because it's true in a comedy, that's where it hits home, right? At least for me, I think it really does. And I think and another really funny thing that I came across at that time was George Lucas saying, it's easy to learn to make films, it's harder to learn to know what to make films about. And that in itself was a journey for me to kind of figure out, okay, wait, so I've developed all these skills, I'm working on my craft, what am I saying with it? What direction am I actually going to go? And again, that was the start of my journey in engaging with that work and that conversation I was having with myself and with the page in terms of writing. And I wrote a few shorts that I started a few shorts that I thought would turn out into short form comedy shorts, and then I realized very quickly, wait a minute, I don't even watch comedy, what am I doing here? So then I started really shifting and thinking about breaking down all the things that I appreciate in terms of TV and cinema, and also breaking down the things that I feel are personal to me. And Tarantino puts it really well. He says, if you're not mildly embarrassed or even fully embarrassed by the film you're putting out because it's so personal, then you're not being authentic to yourself. So
not going deep enough.
It's not going deep enough. So really, for me, the last few years were also a process of going deep into figuring out the things that are important to me as a person, not necessarily as an artist, in terms of my own subjective experience on this earth. What does that mean for me? Who am I? What are the issues that plague me, that bring me joy, that run the gamut of emotions for me specifically? And I really started to kind of break them down. Started writing sort of stream of conscious paragraphs about what that means to me. And through those essays, I came down to a point where I was like, okay, these are the themes that my films will have, and this is the tonality that I'm interested in, and so on. So it for me, yes, I think definitely I want to be able to work within a domain that is intellectually, morally, and emotionally challenging, but also entertaining and enrapturing and engaging. I think that's important for a film to do.
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the things, and it comes back to there's enough commonality between music and art and film. But as a artist, and being part of, the context of where you're from and which environment you live in is so important. Because I feel one of the main things that motivates me to make albums or to find interesting artists that have relevant things to say about living in Pakistan and having the experience of being from here is, we are situated in the world in a unique place where it's a Muslim country, but it's not an Arabic country, so we're next to India. We have our own little culture. It's known as one of the most unsafe places, and to a large extent that can be arguably is true. But yet, people don't know much about us, on a global scale. So when I'm thinking of making an album, or if I were to make a film, I want it to be relevant on the world audience, because now we're on the internet and things are on Netflix, and it's a global audience of consumption, and our art is now making it to the the Oscars and the Grammys and things like that. So that should be the goal should be no less than that level.
Absolutely, I think now that we have access, it's important to engage with the work in a way that feels like you're speaking to a global audience.
Exactly.
But at the same time, I think it's really important to identify with your culture, your environment, your heritage, and be proud of that. Instead of, there's no harm, I think, in taking in influences from the world, and even in terms of music or film or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, you really have to, if you're going to be authentic to yourself and to your work and to your art, then you really need to identify with where you're from. And that has to be worn proudly. It has to be worn with maturity as well.
And again, I think the thing that makes me feel like there's so much potential and so much more to be said through film and through art from our part of the world is we've been through post 9/11. Our part of the world has been through a kind of experience that the conversation has been global about terrorism, about this and that, whatever post 9/11 reality, but we're the ones for the most part that have lived through the effects of it, the bans, the Taliban taking over entire cities in our country and things like that, and plus being in a culture where people are confused about what religion is, whether it means art should be banned or music should be banned, or what's allowed, what's not allowed. So in that context, being artists, there's ostensibly a lot for us to say, which is yet to be said, and which has to be then understood through that global lens again, and then the conversation can go forward,
Absolutely,
So in that sense, I feel like, when I'm making an album nowadays, it's not good enough just to mimic some really good, jazz sound or rock sound that I've grown up listening to. It's very important to put a Pakistani stamp in it, whether it's through the instrumentation or the language that it's, like we did Irfan's album and it was very jazz and blues influenced. But rather than just have him sing in Urdu, I was like, why don't you just do it in Chitrali? Because that's what is completely natural to
That's
you.
who he is.
And that's who you are, where you're from. And something like that has never been done, So what I'm excited about is to see those stories and to hear about those experiences through...
And let me add to that there is no homogeneous Pakistani art.
Absolutely.
I think the thing that people tend to brush over maybe a tad too simplistically is that this is Pakistan or this is the dash of Pakistan or whatever. There are multitudes, there are multiples, there are अनगिनत कहानियाँ हैं हमारी, ठीक है, अनगिनत voices हैं. We're all people at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
our subjective experience in Pakistan means that even if you are living this current life, you're living it like yourself. And that means each person has their own story to tell, has their own voice. So that's 220 million plus
Yeah.
voices.
And it's
right?
exciting.
Not all of which are artists, of course, I'm
Yeah.
not saying that, but the fact that there is that plethora out there of different approaches and opinions and experiences means that our art inevitably is wide ranging and therefore unexplored.
Yeah.
अभी इतना सा निकला है भाई.
बिल्कुल.
इतना सा भी नहीं निकला. I think इतना सा निकला है भाई. You know?
Yeah.
So that I think is changing thanks to the internet and you're right. I think artists do need to engage with that accessibility now and make it about engaging with a larger audience that comes from a different place.
Yeah.
And to show them this is who I am in this country, not who we are.
Yeah.
An artist can't necessarily represent everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I shared this thing that showed up on my feed, like Steve Y is talking about, if there's one piece of advice you're going to take from me is that find the thing that you enjoy or that represents you and exaggerate it,
Yeah.
So, and that's what it's all about. Like,
Right.
I can't wait to see the exaggerated Pathan stories versus the exaggerated Sindhi and Baluch.
Right.
Like, they're totally different, but they coexist in the same space, which people see from the outside as this one crazy place called Pakistan. But when they see this different diversity of things hopefully coming out, then that
and the specificity of it, of each artist and their experience and their work.
Yeah.
That is, I think, really where the magic is.
Yeah. So this has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being here and good luck with everything that you're doing.
Thank you, man.
Take care and please watch, like, subscribe, check out True Brew TV. It still exists on YouTube.
Archived for all eternity.
And check out the work Jamal's been doing as a filmmaker, some recent music videos, and follow A for Aleph. And thanks. Tune in next time.